Ladies, gentlemen, good afternoon. This is author Germinal Van, and the subject of today it's a very technical subject. I will be speaking about economics, but precisely about monetary theory. And I've never studied economics per se. I never had a formal education in economics. I never took a single class in economics, whether it was in college or grad school. In fact, I studied politics. And I have become lately inclined in the field of economics because I wanted to become proficient in the subject. I wanted to be able to discuss with people about economic issues. So I decided to educate myself uh, on monetary theory, on economic philosophy, economic theory, and political economy, generally speaking. But today, we're going to talk about monetary theory and precisely about two kinds of monetary systems. And the purpose of this video is to see between the two which one is the most suited to contain inflation at a very low level. So these two monetary systems are the gold standard and fiat money. So I'm going to start with fiat money because it is the current system that we use in the United States and all around the world. So the word fiat comes from Latin. It means it shall be. So of course we can see already the arbitration of a central authority imposing its will uh, upon I would say its subjects instead of citizens, because the citizens did have no say, they didn't consent. So it's an arbitration already. So fiat money basically is a monetary system in which the value of paper currency is backed by no physical commodity. What gives value to paper currency is government. So the government signs a decree that says that paper currency now has value. If, for instance, we look at this $20 bill here, we see that it is written on the bottom left that this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So basically, it means that the government has declared that this paper bill here has value. So you can go to any bank. If you give this $20 bill to the teller, he will give you other paper money that equates that $20 bill instead of giving you a physical commodity that reflects the value of that $20 bill. So the problem with fiat money is that it easily creates inflation. If we see since officially 1971, the United States has witnessed few economic crises because government has printed too much money. So I took some notes here to actually elaborate on my arguments. So the thing with fiat money is that the risk of losing value due to inflation or hyperinflation is actually intrinsic. So if there is an economic bust, the government is more inclined to print more money than it needs, so it will compensate the lack of money supply that whatever industry needs. So in this case, the government is basically shrinking the value of money by printing more. So fiat money is actually the cornerstone of monetary nationalization. The problem with monetary nationalization is that when you nationalize a currency, it actually intensifies the likelihood that unemployment will actually increase. Because if there is only one single currency for everything and that currency loses value, people will be there is a strong likelihood that people will be unemployed because it will be hard to supply money not just to commercial banks but to industries to pay their employees, because that money has no value. So who controls fiat money? Fiat money, of course, when I say government, it's the government itself and the central banks. So basically the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve is in charge of maintaining inflation and deflation as well, and keep it unemployment low. So when do you know that the economy is doing good? When inflation is basically between 3 and 10%. But so long as inflation is below 10%, you're doing okay. You're doing okay. But the perfect equilibrium of in the law of supply and demand is when the inflation is at 3%. So fiat money was actually instigated by that relation of supply and demand. The reason why fiat money right now is a reliable monetary system is because everyone around the world trusts the dollar. Simple as that. The day the dollar will shrink, every other currency will shrink too, because uh, all currencies in the world are using fiat money as well, and they rely on the dollar in order to establish their exchange rate. So long as the dollar is doing okay, their exchange rate will be good. But if the dollar shrinks, the exchange rate also will be deficient. So one thing to understand about fiat money is that it is it's like it's in economics. Fiat money is good when it comes to short-term issues. So if there is like bank panics, okay, we're going to print a little more money so that we can compensate the lack of money supply that is going on in with the banks. So it's to help the banks out. But when you establish that as the main monetary system to convey and conduct the economy as a whole, in the long run, the dollar will lose its value if it's not backed by commodity. That is why now I am coming to the gold standard, which is, of course, a monetary system in which the value of money is backed by a physical commodity, whether it's silver or gold, but preferably gold, because people trust the gold better. The gold was, in fact, the metal that was used to do trades. So the gold standard was used in the United States from 1792 to 1971. It was officially the monetary system, I said officially, the monetary system by law in 1900, when the Gold Standard Act was passed to make the gold standard the legal tender of the monetary system of the United States. However, in 1961, the gold standard was already becoming the dominant uh, banking system in the US. So Salmon Chase, who was the Treasury Secretary of the United States at the time, issued the the paper currency. So basically, it's a certificate. So if you have, for instance, that $20 bill, instead of saying this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, it will say this note is a certificate to say that you can redeem that money for a set amount of gold. So the thing about the gold standard is that it actually limits money supply. So people cannot overprint money whenever they want. They can only print. So the printing of the money can only be adequate to the amount of gold that they have in stock. So if they print more than the amount of gold they have, they're going to create deflation. Deflation means that the price of goods and services shrinks to the point that it's even below 0% rate. Because an economy needs always to have price increasing a little bit to keep competition going, because if price completely shrink below 0% exchange rate, then the currency has no value as well. So the gold standard actually constrained the federal government power to pass silly policies about monetary theory. So it constrained government power to overprint money, to overborrow. So the government had to print according to the gold, to the amount of gold that it has in its reserve. So, and when we compare the gold standard also and fiat money, we see that the purchasing power of the gold standard is very stable. The gold standard, in fact, keeps inflation relatively low. If a country has the gold standard as its main monetary system, inflation will never go beyond 10%. It will be always a single digit. And if your inflation is single digit, that means that your economy is good. So the pure gold standard actually worked from 19 no not from 19 from uh 1871 to 1914. Why 1914? Because in 1914 the United States was engaged in World War I. So President Woodrow Wilson has to take the United States off the gold standard so that it can supply its military expenditures. Because going to war under the gold standard, you're going to run out of gold very quick. So in this case, it was legitimate to print more money so that the government could be able to sustain its military expenditures. And then people have said that the gold standard was the system that was actually the system that created the Great Depression, which is of course a big lie, because it is not. It is the Federal Reserve with the real bills doctrine. I wrote an article not too long ago about the real bills doctrine and how it actually generate the Great Depression. So when the Great Depression occurred, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed a legislation called the Gold Reserve Act, which which outlawed the retention of gold by private ownership. So only people who works in jewelry could have, and who were licensed in it, could have the authority to have gold for purposes of sales. Otherwise, someone like me or you cannot have gold in their house. So that means that FDR at this point nationalized the gold. He nationalized not only the gold, but he literally dismantled the gold standard by nationalizing the currency. He made the Department of Treasury and the Federal Reserve the two entities to control the money supply. So they were in charge of deciding how much money they're going to give to commercial banks. It was the Federal Reserve who already made that mistake by giving an excess of money supply to commercial banks by printing more money than it should. And we saw that this policy created the Great Depression. The reason why I like the gold standard is because it maintains inflation at a really low level. It stabilized the economy. And overall, it limits the power of government to make bad decisions on money supply. That is why they took off the gold standard, because it constrained government power. Now there's no gold, the government can do whatever it wants with the money supply. It can print as much as it wants. It can pass whatever legislation to ensure that the currency remains under federal control. Because the gold standard, it is hard to control the gold standard because the gold standard enables free banking. Free banking, two banks can get into a monetary arrangement and decide the fixed exchange rate at which they want to set the value of their money. And the good thing about the gold standard as well is that you can melt coins. You can, I even wrote it here, you can operate by gold backed paper currency. You can do plenty of things with under the gold standard without government involvement. But with fiat money, without government, you can't do anything because this piece of paper only has value because government says it has value. Otherwise, there is no value in this piece of paper. But with the gold standard, government doesn't need to decide if this piece of paper has value. It's only the bank that gets to decide because the bank use a certificate to ensure that this piece of paper has value for a set amount of gold. So, to answer the question between fiat money and the gold standard, which one of the two attenuates, or should I say neutralize or contains inflation relatively low, it is the gold standard. It is the gold standard. With the gold standard, inflation will never ever go up. Instead. But there's some disadvantage with the gold standard. Do not get me wrong. I've been talking about the gold standard in good terms, but there are also some flaws about the gold standard. So one flaw here is the lack of flexibility in money supply. So as I said, that in that aspect, fiat money has an advantage in it because in times of recessions, the government sometimes needs to print a little more to compensate the lack of money supplies that the gold standard can create. So another disadvantage is that the process of adjustment for countries with payment and deficit increase unemployment as well. So if the economy is short in gold, it creates also unemployment. So yes, the gold standard is good, but it has its flaws. But personally, if I have to choose between the gold standard and fiat money as a stable monetary system to ensure a sustainable economic growth, I will go with the gold standard. Now, can we bring back the gold standard? That's another debate. There's some advocates such as Professor Lawrence White, who is a strong advocate of the gold standard, who says that it's possible. But this is another debate that we can have at some point. But strictly in this subject, which one of the two provides a better sustainability of inflation of an economy? It is the gold standard, for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to me. I really appreciate your